All right, welcome everyone. We just went live. We're actually using new software. So not quite sure how the stream quality is going to look, how things are going to sound. So if you guys could let us know in the comments down below how things are sounding, how things are looking. If they're looking good, we'll go ahead and get started, but we'll get started in about 30 seconds. I want to give you guys enough time to kind of look and see and make sure things are working the way that we want them to be working. Quality might be a little rough here for the first 30 seconds or so. Things might be a little pixelated and gross, but it should even out after a little bit, just as YouTube catches up and its encoder gets going. So let us know if you have something, can hear us, see us, if things are working well on your end, and we'll get started. Yay. Who's excited? Oh, looks great. Thank you, William Robinson. I appreciate that. You've been asking questions for a while, which is fantastic. Thank you for tuning in. Good, looks fine here from Eric. Awesome, thanks guys. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First thing I wanna say is welcome. Thank you guys for watching. This is part really 4, video number 4 on astrophotography that we've done. And tonight is gonna be all about computer processing stuff. So a couple things before we dive in. Number one, this is definitely not gonna be a super basic video. If you are a seasoned astrophotographer, you might want to turn your gaze toward another video. This is definitely not something that is going to be very advanced. We're going to be using simple software. We're going to be starting at square one. Also, this video is not the first step in astrophotography. You want to make sure you know how to take images first, and that would be where you'd start with the videos that are down in the description. I've linked our 3 earlier videos down there, so check them out if you're totally getting started with astrophotography. But if you've got some images and you are excited to get editing and get crunching on them and putting them together into one final master photo, that's what tonight's for. Before we dive in, I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors, Canon and B&H. You guys are awesome. Canon lets us use these cameras, which produce nice, beautiful looking video. And B&H gave us these mics so that you guys can hear me. So thank you to them. They are fantastic. Secondly, I have actually a team of 3 employees over here who are all awesome. Our producer team, whatever we want to call them. They're going to be answering comments, making sure that the audio works well, making sure that everything is good for you guys on the stream. So first thing I want to talk about is kind of a little bit about what stacking does, why we do it, what it's all for, what the point is. So the big thing with astrophotography is we're trying to battle noise in our images. Noise is that random variation that we get from image to image when we start shooting. And with astrophotography, because our subject is so dim, like if you look at a galaxy through a telescope, most people say it looks like a fuzzy blob, which is totally true. It's just a little fuzzy white blob over a black sky. And the problem is that that blob is so dim compared to its surroundings that when you take a photograph of it, sometimes if you were to look at like the number of the count, the value associated with the galaxy area versus the background, they would only vary by 1 or 2 values, which means there's not much contrast between them. So when we stretch them out, we're stretching out the difference between the light stuff and the dark stuff, but we're also stretching out the noise. So we need to combat that somehow. And by taking many images, we can stack them on top of each other. And because noise is random, every image that we take, that randomness slowly goes away and we get a much cleaner photo. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're also going to talk about image calibration, where we can take dark frames, flat frames, bias frames, and combine them with our light frames to give us a final result. Now, if lights, flats, darks, biases, all that stuff means nothing to you, go watch my other video. So like literally go down and click the video down in the description, watch that, come back to this, it'll be recorded, I promise. You need to know what those are in order to move on. So I'm going to turn over to the computer here. We're going to start working a little bit and kind of look at how these files are organized, because organization is key when we start editing. So here I've got a folder of images on my desktop called 2018-10-22. And this is how I like to name my folders. I prefer to, when I go out for a night of astrophotography, I like to name my folders with the date that I shot them, and then also with the object that I was shooting. So M31 is the Andromeda galaxy, and I like that to be front and center. The other thing that I like to do is have, also I should point out, this water bottle is from the Mauna Kea observatories on the summit of Hawaii, and I'm also wearing my star shirt. Nerd party. All right, apologies, my mouth was getting famished or thirsty. So here we go. we've got our M31 folder. Inside of that, I like to make a subfolder for bias, darks, flats, and lights. And for tonight, I've basically just grabbed 5 of each. So I've got 5 bias frames, 5 dark frames, 5 light frames, and 5 flat frames. And we're going to stack these together into one. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up DeepSkyStacker. And again, you guys, this is a very basic utility. There are more things we can do in DeepSkyStacker that than I'm going to cover tonight. But for the purposes of a basic stack for astrophotography, basic calibration and registration, we can totally use this program. Now, a couple quick things on DeepSkyStacker. Number one, this is as it was after I installed it. Everything's default here. I haven't changed any preferences. And number two, there are links to this program down in the description. So if you're looking for DeepSkyStacker, it's down there. Natively, it only runs on Windows. But Mac folks, there's actually a cool little workaround that a company, not a company, but a random group of people have come up with to let you run it on a Mac. So there's links in the description for both of those. So we open up DeepSkyStacker, and this is actually a really easy program to use. All we need to do is tell DeepSkyStacker where our images live. And there's a few different ways we can do that. The easiest way is I'm just going to grab this folder of light frames right here. I'm going to click, drag, and drop it into the gray space over here on DeepSkyStacker. And we let go, and it's going to say, hey, what type of files are those? And I'm going to say these are light frames. We're going to hit OK. I'm going to then do the same thing with flats, and I'm going to say these are flat frames and hit OK. Same thing with darks. We're going to say dark and hit OK. And then the other way you could do it, just so you guys can see it, there's also these buttons in the upper left where we can say dark, flat, bias. And I could actually click the bias button, scroll up, navigate to my desktop, go to the folder, grab the bias folder, and then grab the images. I find it way faster to just click and drag. Makes it super simple. So we get them loaded in. And now if I maximize DeepSkyStacker, we can see here that I've got all of those images loaded in down here at the bottom. We've got 5 light frames, 5 dark frames, 5 flats, and 5 bias. Now, we need to take a minute and talk a little bit about frames, because your final stack is only going to be as good as the images you put into it. And if you guys have watched my previous videos, you've seen that tracking error and periodic error and polar alignment, there's all these hard things that we have to do to ensure that stars stay round throughout the course of our exposure. If we look at some of these frames, actually the light frames are 600 seconds long, which is 10 minutes. Well, the amount of movement that there is in the sky in a 10-minute exposure is a lot. So you need a very accurate mount to be able to track that long. And even with a very accurate mount, sometimes it's just not going to work, and one of your lights will be elongated. It'll be an oval, or it'll be a star pattern, or it'll look like a comet. It'll have something wrong with it. So before you do this, before you get into DeepSkyStacker and start stacking, I really recommend you guys take your light frames, bring them into Lightroom, bring them into Bridge, look at them in some photo editing program, and delete the ones that don't look good. Delete the ones that don't have perfectly round stars. That's super, super key. So you want to make sure you get that done. Also, just a quick note, I'm using CCD images that were shot with a dedicated astronomy camera. So my images today are going to be black and white. You would have color images from a DSLR. There's no difference in processing or anything like that, but just so you know, that's why you'll see black and white in a little bit.
Hey Forrest, before you dive back in, we've got a question from William.
Yes. How do I solve the problem in DeepSkyStacker where after it stacks, the frames are not lined up properly? Oh, so William is asking in the chat, basically, it sounds like if you're using DeepSkyStacker and it stacks your frames and they're not lined up properly after that happens, there is a preference in DeepSkyStacker where you can set basically how hard it looks for stars in the images. It's called like the star registration threshold or the star detection threshold. You could increase that a little bit to try to have it find more stars, or decrease it, I don't remember which way it is, but increase or decrease it to try to have it find more stars on the field, so it would be trying to match over more stars. If that still doesn't work, I'd be interested to see the light frames that you're feeding into it, because sometimes if the light frames don't have perfectly round stars, it has a hard time aligning them. So definitely check that first. That's a great question. So we've got our frames, we've got our light frames. I've already gone through them. I know that all the light frames look really good here. And I know that my darks and my flats actually aren't very good. We'll talk about that in a minute, but my darks and my biases are all good as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click check all to check all of these frames. And then I'm going to come down to stack checked pictures. Now, you can also go to register checked pictures. It's just a different process. I'm going to jump right to stacking here and click on that. Now, it's going to give you a little preview of what it's going to do. And I guess before I'll do this, I think I'm going to show you guys one of my lights. So I'm going to click on one of these light frames just to show you the difference right off the bat of what's going on. Don't know why that just happened. Sarah's using my wife's computer. Her trackpad is a little funky. I'm going to click on this here. So here's one of my light frames, and you guys can see that it's got this little fuzzy blob in the middle, and that's the Andromeda Galaxy. And I think you'll notice a little bit of a difference once we stack. So I'm going to come over, I'm going to go stack checked pictures. We're going to hit OK. I'm going to leave everything default. Again, we're going super simple here. And hit OK, and it's going to start working. Now, what's happening here, you guys, is if you know a little bit about darks, flats, and biases, it's basically doing those calibrations. So it's taking your dark frames, which are images of the noise in your photo, it's subtracting that noise away from your light frames. It's taking the flats, which are images of vignetting, dust spots, things like that, and it's dividing those out of the light frames. It's taking your bias, which is an image of the bias voltage on your sensor, and it's taking that out as well. And then it's stacking the images, aligning them, and putting them into one final master image. Right off the bat, I think you can notice the difference of a stacked photo or image versus the individual images. Instead of that little blobber tin that we had in the middle, we have this like super epic looking galaxy. Now again, it's black and white. It's because I used a CCD. DSLR people, you'll have the same thing. But woo, like that's pretty cool, right? Like off the bat, we've got a nice clean image. And if I move my mouse around here, you guys can see that those stars, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of my screen here, you can see that those stars are just nice and round. There's not a lot of noise back there. Everything looks really clean. So that's a good stack. Now, should take a minute. That was all default settings. You saw how easy that was. We literally loaded in the frames, we hit go, that's all it took, right? Sometimes it won't work that well, and sometimes you need to delve into DeepSkyStacker's settings and see what's happening and mess with them a little bit. Usually though, if you take good lights, good flats, good darks, and good biases, you feed them in, it should just work, which is pretty sweet. Now, from this point on, we need to do a little bit of editing. DeepSkyStacker has some editing ability, but not as much as I would like to have. So I actually usually take my image from DeepSkyStacker, I export it as a big honkin' TIFF file, and I send that TIFF file into Photoshop to do more editing. So we're going to do that right now as we do that. So all we got to do once we have our stack, we have a question. I'm told by my production team. Hi, production team. We have a question which is, what's the difference between mean and median stacking? It's basically when it's taking all of those 5, 10, 20, 30 images and it's putting them together into one. It's how it averages the values between the different frames. Mean is going to do a different value averaging process than a median will do. As to the specifics, I'm not really the one to ask. I'm sure there's a nerdier person out there in the world who would be happy to answer that. If someone in the comments knows, that'd be sweet. If not, do some Googling. I actually don't know. I know what the difference between mean and median is, but not how that relates to stacking and more importantly, the result. So you could do a little looking on that for sure. So we get to this point, I'm going to go ahead and export this guy. So we're going to go to right here where it says Save Picture to File. Click on that. And I'm going to give this the name Final Stack. And I'm going to save it in the desktop, or on the desktop, in that same folder that my original images are in. So we're going to save it in there. And here's the important part. We're going to save this guy as a TIFF image with 32 bits of information in it. So a very big, nice, deep file. We're not going to do any compression, don't need to do anything down here. We're just going to hit save. We'll save that file out. Now, because this is a 32-bit file, it's big and it's got a lot of information to it. So I'm going to minimize DeepSkyStacker. And you can see now in that folder, I've got this finalstack.tiff. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to open it into Photoshop. Now, You could open this into a different program for sure. In fact, you could do some stacking or some editing in DeepSkyStacker. I'm assuming though that most of our audience is a photographer because you guys are following a photography channel, and most people who do astrophotography also do photography. So I'm gonna make the guess that most people are at least a little bit familiar, know what Photoshop is, right? So Photoshop is where I choose to do that just because I'm more comfortable working in Photoshop than I am doing edits in DeepSkyStacker. So here I am in Photoshop. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna crop this a little bit. And the reason I do that is you guys can actually see, let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit better here. We're gonna zoom way in on this file. And you guys can see if I get out of this crop, there's this little black edge. Oh, I confirmed the crop, there we go. There's this little black edge up here at the very top of the image. And that's because when it stacked and it averaged those frames together, there was a little bit of misalignment between the frames. And so they didn't all line up at the edges. And that's going to throw off our histogram a little bit when we go to do some curves and some levels adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and crop that, get that cleaned up. Crop a little bit off the top, a little bit off the right and the left and the bottom. There we go. We'll confirm that crop. Now from here, you'll notice we're going to be very limited in what we can do. So if I go over to my adjustments panel over here on the right, and if you don't have adjustments in your Photoshop, you can go to Window, Adjustments, and that will bring it back just like that. You'll notice that all of my different adjustment layers are actually grayed out except for levels and exposure. And that's actually fine. That's because this is a 32-bit file. All we need is levels. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new levels adjustment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this very middle gray triangle and I'm going to bring it into the left-hand side here. And it's going to make the image look gross. That's fine. So we'll bring it in a little bit. And then I'm going to go back to adjustments and I'm going to make another levels adjustment. We're going to stretch it out. If you look at that histogram, all of our good information is in that tiny little spike in the histogram. So what we need to do with levels is we need to pull that histogram apart so that we have some contrast. Right now it's kind of like gray, right? There's not a lot of interest to it. So this time I'm going to bring in the middle triangle a little bit and also the black triangle on the left. Now we can see things start to happen. We start to get a little bit of galaxy coming out. So we're going to do that again. We're going to go to adjustments and levels. And the reason we do this multiple times is because each time that histogram is going to get a little wider, little wider, little wider. Now, quick note on this. This is a 32-bit file, which allows us to stretch it as much as we're stretching it. If you did this to an 8-bit file or a 16-bit file, like one image of a galaxy, not a bunch of images stacked, when you stretched it that much, you would get banding, the histogram would have all these gaps in it, and it would look really, really gross. It wouldn't be a nice, smooth gradient. So you can only do this to a nice 32-bit file. Do we have any questions, Jessica? How are things going? Photoshop, do you export in Lightroom straight to Photoshop? Photoshop, let me export Photoshop, not enough memory. Ooh, interesting. Oh, look, you're blog solving. I love it. My production team is on it. Do it through Lightroom. Let's see, William, in Photoshop, do you export into Lightroom or straight Photoshop? Normally, I just use straight Photoshop for astrophotography. Lightroom is kind of chuggy and slow with this type of thing. So for my astro stuff, I stick to Photoshop. With my other stuff, I stick to Lightroom. I like to keep them two separate. That's a great question, William. So we get this set. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my black triangle a little bit more. And we're going to start to see a problem here very shortly. So let me make one more levels adjustment, and then I'll talk about the issue that we see. Now, obviously, the background of this photo should be black, right? The area behind the galaxy, we want to be black. And you'll notice I've got this weird gradient going on where there's like some black areas right above and below the galaxy, but then it's light around the outsides of it. That's a problem. And what that actually was caused by is my flat frames were not done properly. My flat frames actually added a gradient to the image. I shot flats, and if you guys have sat through my other astro videos or watched them, the way that I normally take flats is I put a t-shirt over the front of the telescope and I point it at the dawn sky, and I take images of the sky in the morning. Well, I didn't do that. I actually didn't use a t-shirt, and I just used the sky, and it went really bad very clearly. So what I would do at this point is, that's not a normal thing to see, and the only thing that would cause that kind of gradation is bad flats or no flats at all. So I would actually go back and I would reprocess this image without the flats. I just wouldn't add the flats into DeepSkyStacker. You'd have much better results. So I added those flat frames in here so that I could talk about bad flat frames. It doesn't look as good as it could intentionally. Believe me or not, it's true. Anyway, we get this here, we go ahead and stretch it, and what I'm gonna do now is I wanna have the full suite of Photoshop ready to go. So I'm actually gonna go to Image, Mode, 16 bits per channel. I'm gonna step this down from a 32-bit file to a 16-bit file because I've done the amount of stretching that I need to do. So we'll do that. I'm gonna say Merge, and then it pops up this HDR toning box. We're going to change the method to exposure and gamma, and we're going to leave the exposure and gamma at their defaults and click OK. And then if I go to adjustments, I have a suite of normal adjustments, and curves is the one I'm after. Now, a quick note on curves. Our next video, actually, next week is going to be Jeff McLean talking about the curves box and all about how to use this thing. So if curves looks new to you and you don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to explain it a little bit, but you should also hit the subscribe button and check out next week's video because Jeff is going to talk about it. But essentially what curves does, you guys, is it gives us the ability to add some contrast into our images. And contrast is basically, if we want to add contrast, we want to darken the darks and we want to lighten the lights. And that's going to add some contrast to what we're looking at. So I'm going to put one point down here and I'm going to darken down. Actually, I'm going to lighten my lights. It's a grayscale image, so it's backwards. So I'm going to lighten my lights right here, but you guys, DSLR users, would put a point down here, bring it down. That would darken your darks. I'm going to put another point right here, and that is going to darken my darks, but that would be lightening your lights. We essentially make an S curve with the curve. We turn it into an S shape. And what that does is it adds contrast in the photo. And what you can do with astrophotography is you can actually go pretty far here and really try to exaggerate that curve. And different things are going to accentuate different parts of the galaxy. And you guys can see there's kind of those, you can pretty clearly see the rings of gas around the galaxy. Different curves are going to accentuate those in different ways. So you can kind of put some points on the curve and play with that as you want to. At this point, I would probably crop it again, take a little bit off the top. I'm going to leave the little, Andromeda's little friend down there to hang out. Zoom in a little bit. And just like that, we've got a pretty nice astro image with only 5 light frames that went into it. So with some simple curves, with some levels, with some DeepSkyStacker, all put together, there is a lot of different things we can accomplish. And it looks like, actually, Jody is commenting on how the difference between median stacking. So that's awesome. Thank you, Jody. That is much appreciated. But you guys, that's basically all there is to it. It's a very smooth process. All we need to do is ensure that we're putting the best images into DeepSkyStacker. So going through your light frames and making sure that you're picking the best of the best with nice, crispy, just beautifully round stars. You're putting those in, you're taking good flats, not like these, good darks, good bias frames. And again, if you want to learn more about flats and biases, watch the video down in the description. We take all those, we put them into DeepSkyStacker, we make that final image, we export it as a big old 32-bit TIFF file, save that TIFF file, open it in Photoshop, do some levels stretching, and then we convert it to 16-bit, do some curve stretching, and we're left with a pretty nice image that from here, I would do my normal photo editing things to. I could do some hue and saturation, I could do some more contrast, less contrast. At this point, I would kind of approach it like a normal photograph because that's really what it is. At the beginning, it's kind of like Astro Nerd Town. Here, it's actually like what we actually can work with and are used to as photographers. Yes. Another question. Why would you not pull the curve on the darks all the way down to give... William, I normally would. The difference here is that my flats are so bad that it added that weird gradient. And so if I pulled it down so far, it would accentuate the bad gradient that I have going on. So I'm not doing that. But normally, if you have good darks, if you have good flats, excuse me, yes, you definitely could pull the curve down a lot more and really crush the sky around the galaxy or the nebula or whatever you were shooting. It's a great question. All right. So you guys, I really, really recommend doing this. Like if you're an astrophotographer, take multiple images, stack them, put them together, make a final nice image. it's kind of fun and it's kind of easy. And if you haven't watched the other videos, make sure you watch those down in the description. But overall, that's pretty much all there is to it. I really thank you guys for watching. It was a nice quick stream. If you're watching this a little bit later, you can leave your comments down in the comment section down below and I'll happily answer those. But yeah, if you guys like this, hit that like button. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button. If you have a question, comment, like I said, leave it in the comment section. And if you want to watch Jeff's, who's over there, you can't see him, but if you want to watch Jeff's curve, he just waved, curves Photoshop video next week, hit the subscribe button down in the corner and get subscribed to our channel. Thanks for watching.